Okay, well, we're continuing inside in the warmth. It's slightly nicer. So, Dr. Weizfeld, can you tell me if the Bund had been accepted in the first Congress by the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks and allowed to articulate their theory of national cultural autonomy and federated society, could the direction of the Soviet Union revolution have gone very differently?
Would have gone completely differently. The Soviet Union would have been saved from its collapse. Initially, it collapsed into a regime that resembled very much the nature of the state established by the Tsarist Empire. Same boundaries, same centralized authority in Moscow, the same repression of national minorities, the same campaign of Russification, imposing the Russian language on various peoples, like the Ukrainians, and in fact making speaking another language illegal. All of that would have been altered with the acceptance of the Jewish Bund. And the Jewish Bund is still to this day excluded by the Marxist movement. Right. A lot of the Marxist movement, even the Jewish Marxists, reject Jewish national identity. They consider it to be a bourgeois concept. They consider any national identity to be bourgeois, unless, of course, it happens to be their national identity in the national state in which they happen to be living. Then they say, oh yes, they are proud Americans, and they talk about we, etc., when they refer to the nation state itself.
Why do they conceive of a national identity as bourgeoisie? What about the national identity? They assume they can only think in terms of the nation state?
Yes, because it's the state that is identified as national rather than a people. Now, this is the nature of Hegelian conception of the nation state. Marx was a young Hegelian. Marx accepted the Hegelian notion of a nation state, which was in effect what was considered at the time the progression of feudalism to establishing the modern nation state, so-called, formulated in the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648. So,
what was Hegel's conception of the nation state?
His conception of the nation state was racist, very racist. When Germany was actually established as a result of the Treaty of Westphalia, he complained that it extended Germany into the provinces that were not pure enough, ethnically speaking, for him. Because for Hegel, only Prussia was a proper nation state, was a pure nation state, because he didn't want to have any national minorities in a nation state. This because he considered the presence of national minorities to be problematic. And they are for a nation state, yes, because the nation state exists in contradiction to the nature of its social composition. There are always national minorities. There's always, differences over who is pure, who is not, etc., etc. It's all very irrational, but that's the nation state for you. So Marxism adopted the same conception of the state because they considered it to be a progressive phenomenon in line with the historical progression of history under historical materialism, and that it was necessary to support the nation state in order to progress in socialism.
Beyond that, which would be the dissolution of the nation state. They believe they had to get through it to destroy it.
According to Marx in his work on the Paris Commune, yes. But otherwise, no, they were going to continue with the nation state as such, intact. There was no conception of overthrowing the bourgeois nation state in the Marxian conception of socialist revolution. However, in his work on the Paris Commune, which was a more progressive kind of a revolution than had conceived of, and that was more so under the influence of the Proudhonist anarchist movement. Marx called for the dissolution of the state, the progressive dissolution of the state, with the development of socialism or the development of communism, so-called. Okay, in that instance, he did call for the dissolution of the state, but not otherwise. And the way in which he called for the progressive dissolution of the state is in itself problematic, because you cannot progressively dissolve a state. You either overthrow the state or you don't.
He would dissolve into its bureaucratic apparatus, which would just oversee the socialist society, but without ruling it from above.
Yeah, when everybody becomes a worker, then everyone's equal, and then there's perfect democracy, and there's no more state because society is governing itself as a worker, socialist, republic, etc., etc. Yeah, it's all just words.
The Bundist concept of federations would still be society governing itself.
Yes, but in a reciprocal manner. You have to introduce a principle of reciprocity. Principle of reciprocity provides for the mutual recognition of various social formations. You cannot assume that everyone is the same in society, in civil society. Sameness is a synonym for equality in populist rhetoric and also in Marxist theory. That's a populist aspect of Marxian theory. And the working class is considered to be the one and only class to remain in existence. Everyone is going to be a worker without any national differentiation. National identity is going to dissolve in favor of working class consciousness. Any other consciousness is considered to be false consciousness and is due to be dissolved by history, if not by force. And it's not true, And this is demonstrated most evidently by the phenomenon of the women's movement. Okay, women are not the same as men, even if they're workers. So right then and there, the whole concept of a homogeneous working class is dissolved. Women are not treated in the same way. They do not have the same consciousness as a result of not having been treated in the same way. They do not have the same jobs. They are segregated into certain classes. Now, this kind of social segregation is called social orders with a big O. Marx refers to this concept of the orders, social orders. He recognizes that social orders exist, but he doesn't appreciate how significant the nature of social orders are in society, because different social orders exist in society, bourgeois society, and they continue to exist in a worker society as well.
They won't be dissolved, ideally.
No, they won't be dissolved. I mean, one can theorize that they would be dissolved, but nonetheless they exist, after a so-called, socialist revolution. So they exist. So how do you treat them? Well, they have to be recognized. And if you recognize one, you have to recognize all the various social formations, whether they are national-based or gender-based or based on territorial demarcation. They have to be
organized and represented in federations.
That's it. You can only sort of recognize social formations, different social formations, social orders in a federation, because you cannot say that you have one homogeneous workers' republic and then the majority prevails, okay? Because the majority could be of a particular social formation that considers that it has a right to dominate every other social formation, okay? Or men, they consider that they have the right to dominate women because there may be fewer women in the working class or something like that, okay? So, majoritarianism or majority rule, which is liberal democracy, which is in fact bourgeois democracy, doesn't work. It's a very limited form of democracy. You have to surpass that, recognize the existence of social formations, and each social formation has to recognize the existence of every other social formation, because, in the principle of reciprocity, if you want recognition for yourself, you have to be willing to offer it to every other social formation as well. Otherwise, you cannot expect to be recognized for what you are, because you have to recognize what other formations are in their own right as well. So this imposes a federation concept on the nature of how society is going to be organized. This follows Proudhon's principle of the federal principle, which is the name of his work on the matter.
So Bundists recognized this in the early 1900s, and in a way, this would be like a defining feature of 20th century identity politics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this has come up as identity politics now, but it's an old problem. No, it wasn't recognized by Marxism. Marxism is too limited as an ideology. It has been surpassed already. Only the Marxists don't know it.
But within Judaism, there's a large identity politics right now between Zionism and its opposition. And last time you talked to me about the contributions to political thought for the Jewish political prophets, as you call them. And in a way, Jews have played a huge role in revolutionary movements in the last 200 or 300 years. Do you think this constitutes a legacy that's inherently Jewish and that could be tapped by a growing Jewish opposition to Zionism?
Yes. The problem is some of the Jewish political theorists, political philosophers, prophets, if you will, were heavily influenced by Marxism, even if they were not of party Marxists. For instance, Rosa Luxemburg. She was an independent thinker. She was revolutionary and an activist. Carried out a revolutionary action which was suppressed. She was martyred. But she did not recognize the nature of Jewish national identity. She was an internationalist, but she was very much occupied with the German working class. And she did not, she was so involved in the German working class movement that she didn't have time to think about the Jewish identity.
Yeah, there's a saying, it's like, what do I care for the cries of the people in the Jewish ghettos, my heart, moves with the cries of the oppressed people, the things are.
Yeah.
So is this, is this a flaw in your thinking? I mean, obviously there are some Jews who get involved in politics who choose to use their identity or don't recognize their nationality.
Yes, that's not a flaw, it's a limitation.
Yeah.
Okay? It becomes a flaw when such a form of Marxists seek to suppress the Jewish revolutionary identity politics. When they move to suppress it or expel it, as was done in Part.3, that becomes a reactionary action, even if it's done in the name of progressive political thought.
And right now, there are many pro-Palestine Jewish solidarity activists and movements who do not use their Jewish identity as a way to assert a new Jewish identity over against Zionism, which has basically taken the brunt of Jewish identity from it.
Yeah, not only taken it, but stolen it and monopolized it and seek to suppress it amongst others. And deny that others can represent the Jewish people in any other name other than Zionism. So evidently, Zionism considers that Jewish national identity is something very important that they have to stake their claim to. Unfortunately, many Jewish leftists don't realize how important this claim is, and they abdicate such a claim and, in effect, turn it over to the Zionists, thus strengthening the Zionist political leadership over the Jewish people. If you do not have an orientation to Jewish national identity as part of the Palestine Solidarity Movement, then you have no strategy to win over the Jewish people against Zionism, which means that you have no strategy to overcome Zionism per se, because Zionism and the Zionists will not pay attention to any critics outside of the Jewish people, because the critics outside of the Jewish people are discredited by history. Therefore, only Jewish voices have any credibility amongst Jewish consciousness. And if the Jewish voices claim not to be Jewish, well, then, they don't get very far.
Which is why asserting a long line of Jewish revolutionaries as a Jewish legacy could be a strong antidote to Zionism in a way, especially if these Jewish revolutionaries were internationalists and anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist in outlook, whereas Zionism, by definition these days, is nationalist, pro-capitalism, you might say, and imperialist.
Yes.
So this could be a...
Well, not only is it a strategy, an effective strategy to overcome Zionism, which is a pragmatic way of looking at it, it is, Jewish national identity in a revolutionary sense, in an anti-Zionist sense, is also a strategy to liberate the Jewish people and to liberate the Jewish working class, because the Jewish people are still segregated into various ghettos, but they are not evident. They may not be neighborhood ghettos. They may not be territorial ghettos. They may not be, ghettos in the Pale Settlement, the Tsarist Empire. But nonetheless, Jewish people are isolated into certain job categories and certain professions, to certain strata. Each class has its own strata within each class, including the bourgeoisie. And a national minority such as the Jewish people are relegated to a certain strata, and within each of these classes, even the Jewish bourgeoisie are in the lower bourgeoisie. In the United States top 500 corporations, there are very few Jewish corporations, that are in this top 500. You have the military-industrial complex, which is predominant in the top 500. And they're not led by Jews. They're not owned by Jews. There are a couple of banks that are evident. But that's about, the biggest, bourgeois that you can get. There may be a large Jewish presence in the media, the American media, maybe 50% of American media, is owned by, Jewish individuals. But that is a sector that was a peripheral sector to begin with, or Hollywood was a peripheral sector that became very successful. Okay. But it is not the dominating corporations of America. It is the transnational corporations of America that are dominant. And these are not led by any Jewish bourgeoisie. So there's a strata in each class. And then in the working class as well, Jewish workers form an isolated strata of that working class. Usually they work for Jewish bourgeois because they can get a job from the Jewish bourgeoisie, whereas they cannot get a job from a Christian bourgeois because the Christian bourgeoisie wants to have a homogeneous working class that they can control better, and they're always worried about Jewish workers forming unions and such. Okay, so if you have social strata within each, of the classes, according to national identity and according to gender identity, etc., whether it be the Jewish national minority or the African American national minority or the Latino national minority, then each of these social categories become social orders because they are a different social strata within each of the social classes within that particular society. So you have this onion effect, which you have to recognize if you want to have a strategy that orients to addressing the concerns of each of these social orders. Otherwise, these social orders will not respond to an appeal that is directed towards another social formation, even though they may be members of the same class. See, it's very complicated. Revolution is not a simple matter. And to have a few slogans, etc., that follows the Marxist paradigm does not get where it's going. Yeah.